What if manipulation isn't the disease but the cure? You've been told it's wrong, selfish, even immoral. You've been taught to believe that influence must be earned, never taken. But look around. The world doesn't reward the honest, it rewards the strategic. The meek may inherit the earth, but only after the cunning have mined its gold, rewritten its history, and sold the story back to them with interest. Here's a brutal paradox. The more transparent you are, the more invisible you become. Strip yourself bare, and the world forgets you. Hide just enough, move in shadow, and suddenly people lean in. They want to know more. They project value onto your silence. They mistake control for depth. The truth, power doesn't belong to those who speak freely. It belongs to those who choose when to speak and why. Now, ask yourself this. Have you ever said yes when every cell in your body screamed no? Have you smiled through clenched teeth? Stayed silent when you could have shattered the room with one sentence? You weren't being kind. You weren't being virtuous. You were being trained subtly over years to suppress your own agency for the comfort of others. And somewhere along the way, they told you that manipulating reality to suit your will was wrong. But was it? Or was it just dangerous to them? Throughout history, the greatest minds wrestled with this conflict. Virtue versus power, truth versus utility. Machiavelli, that notorious Florentine, dared to say what others only whispered, that goodness without cunning is powerless. In his world and ours, those who separate morality from strategy do so at their own peril. Because the battlefield isn't just political, it's psychological. It's the negotiation in a boardroom, the silence at a dinner table, the flicker in someone's eyes when they realize you know something they don't. You've been told manipulation is the weapon of the villain. But what if it's the language of survivors? What if it's the instinct of the evolved? You, Dan T, manipulate to destroy. You manipulate to create a world where you are no longer prey. Consider this. Every day, you're being influenced by algorithms, by headlines, by lovers, by the tone in someone's voice. Influence isn't optional. It's happening. The only question is, are you the one shaping the story or being shaped by it? The truth is, manipulation, when stripped of its emotional baggage, is simply the art of bending perception to align with intent. And when done with clarity, with purpose, with self-awareness, becomes not an act of deception, but an act of creation. You aren't lying to the world, you're sculpting it. Not to harm, but to survive, to rise, to matter. So the real question is not, should you manipulate? But how can you do it without losing your soul? Without drowning in guilt? Without becoming the very tyrant you once feared? To answer that, we have to descend into the deeper layers of the psyche, where fear and desire play chess, where identity is fluid, and where power doesn't come from brute force, but from the precision of intent. We'll journey through the ideas of thinkers who dared to blur the lines, Jung, Nietzsche, Fromm, and walk the tightrope between strategy and authenticity. Because in a world that rewards illusion, the most dangerous weapon is self-awareness. Let's begin. You were raised to believe that goodness is its own reward. But what if that belief was engineered to keep you docile? What if guilt is not a moral compass, but a leash? At the heart of this inquiry lies a confrontation with a figure that has haunted philosophy for centuries. The Machiavellian, not the cartoon villain twisting his mustache behind closed doors, but the quiet strategist. The one who sees the world not as it should be, but as it is. Cold, chaotic, governed not by fairness, but by perception. Machiavelli didn't preach cruelty for cruelty's sake. He offered something far more disturbing: a mirror. In The Prince, he dismantled the illusion of moral leadership and asked a question that echoes louder in our age of curated personas and algorithmic influence. Is it better to be loved or feared? And beneath that, a more refined question: is it better to appear virtuous or to be effective? But this is not a call to sociopathy. It's a call to lucidity. Because manipulation is not inherently evil. Like fire, it can burn, but it can also illuminate. The key lies in its application and in your awareness of it. Carl Jung spoke of the shadow, the unconscious part of ourselves, that houses everything we reject or repress. Aggression, ambition, lust, cunning. Most people exile these traits, convinced they're beneath them. But the shadow doesn't disappear. It festers. It leaks through passive-aggressive remarks, through sabotage disguised as kindness, through quiet resentments that erupt in strange, inexplicable ways. To be whole, Jung insisted, one must integrate the shadow, not deny it. To confront your darker instincts, name them, understand their source. The manipulator who doesn't know they're manipulating is the most dangerous kind. But the one who knows, who chooses with intention, that person has stepped out of the fog of guilt and into clarity. Imagine this, a conversation where the words are polite, but the subtext is war. A date where every laugh is a negotiation of power. A job interview where you're not just selling skills, but bending perception. We live in a constant exchange of influence. The difference between manipulation and persuasion. Often, nothing but intention. The guilt you feel when you nudge someone's choice, when you craft your silence into mystery. When you say what they want to hear rather than what's true, that guilt was implanted. A virus in the system. Because someone, somewhere, realized that a guilt-ridden mind is easier to control than a self-possessed one. Machiavellian tactics, when filtered through ethical self-awareness, become something more elegant. Strategic empathy. You understand how humans work, not to exploit, but to navigate. You recognize that everyone is playing a game whether they admit it or not. And if you refuse to play, you don't opt out. You simply play badly. Consider this analogy. The world is a chessboard, but most people walk onto it thinking it's a yoga mat. They come seeking balance, honesty, presence. And while they're aligning their chakras, the game has already begun. The pieces are moving. The queens are being sacrificed. The pawns are bleeding. You don't have to become cruel to become powerful, but you do have to become conscious. Power is not the enemy. Guiltless manipulation is not about deception. It's about intention without apology. Influence without internal collapse. Fromm, in Escape from Freedom, warned us of what happens when the individual abandons autonomy. When you reject your capacity to influence, you surrender it to others. You become a vessel for their narratives, their goals, their rules. But what if you reclaimed that power? What if, instead of recoiling from your capacity to shape others, you refined it, owned it, directed it toward outcomes that align with your vision without waiting for moral permission? Manipulation, when conscious, becomes artistry. The bending of social reality to create space for your truth. It's not about lying, it's about selecting which truth to emphasize and which to withhold. It's about crafting narratives, shaping atmospheres, reading desires that others haven't even spoken aloud. And it starts when you stop apologizing for playing a game that everyone else is pretending docility exists. Now let us peel back the theory and drop into the raw interior of it all, where these strategies are not just ideas, but emotions, relationships, regrets. Where the desire to influence collides with the longing to be loved. Let's walk into the human heart of manipulation, where the mask becomes a mirror. Imagine waking up in a life that feels borrowed. Every smile calibrated, every word rehearsed. You perform love, perform ambition, perform peace. But behind your eyes, there's a quiet ache. Not because you've lost yourself, but because you never learned how to truly possess yourself. You weren't taught to be powerful. You were taught to be agreeable, lovable, predictable. And the moment you stepped out of line, asserted a need, withheld a truth. Disrupted the equilibrium, you were labeled manipulative, as if influence is a crime. As if honesty is the only acceptable currency in a world where everyone is lying, just more politely. You remember the first time you saw someone do it with ease. They didn't raise their voice. They didn't plead. They simply tilted the room. With a gesture, a phrase, a pause. People leaned in, and you wondered, what did they know that I didn't? Here's the emotional wound. You've been manipulating your own desires for years, dimming your intensity so you wouldn't scare them, downplaying your intelligence so you wouldn't threaten them, making yourself smaller to fit into their version of you. And you called it love. You called it compromise. But really, it was self-erasure. So when you finally learn the tools to shape perception, when you begin to direct instead of obey, to influence instead of accommodate, it doesn't feel liberating. It feels wrong, like you're betraying some invisible moral code. But whose code is it, really? Let's be honest. Everyone manipulates. The child crying to get a toy. The partner withholding affection to gain control. The friend who flatters you before asking for a favor. It's not the act itself that wounds, it's the intention underneath. The unconscious game, the denial, the gaslighting of self and others. But what if you brought light into that darkness? What if, instead of fearing manipulation, you turned it inside out, owned it, examined it, mastered it? Imagine saying to someone, I am influencing you, and I know it, but I do it with care, with purpose, with awareness. Friedrich Nietzsche once wrote, he who despises himself still respects himself as one who despises. There's dignity even in self-loathing, because at least it belongs to you. But what happens when you don't even know you're replaying someone else's game? When your guilt isn't your own, but inherited. This is where manipulation becomes sacred, when it's reclaimed as agency, as choice. You not deceiving others, you reminding yourself that you have the right to shape the conditions of your own existence, to edit the script, to bend the social field around you, not because you cruel, but because you finally tired of being bent by everyone else's agenda. But it's not easy. There's grief in this power, because you'll lose people, the ones who only loved you when you were passive, the ones who fed off your softness but couldn't stand your strength, the ones who called you dangerous when you stopped being predictable. There's a moment quiet, internal, irreversible, when you realize you no longer owe anyone the comfort of your silence, when you feel the guilt rise up like a wave, and you don't shrink, you surf it, because guilt is not the signal that you've done wrong. Sometimes it's the signal that you've finally done something right for you. And yet, the hunger for connection never leaves. You still want to be seen, known, loved, but now you want it on your terms. You want to be met where you are, not where you've shrunk to. And so the manipulation evolves. It becomes cleaner, more intentional, less about control, more about co-creation. This is the paradox. To truly connect, you must first learn how to influence. Not from a place of fear, but from clarity. Not to dominate, but to dance. So here you are, standing at the edge of your own becoming. The guilt whispers. The conditioning tightens. But beneath it, something ancient stirs. A knowing, a permission. Not from the world, but from yourself. You're not evil. You're not broken. You're just finally learning how to play the game. With your eyes open, now let's draw the strands together. Let's integrate this tension, this fire, into something whole. Something dangerous, yes, but also honest. Let's move into the final insight. You've come this far into the shadows, through the layers, past the walls of guilt that were never really yours. And now, something quiet settles in your chest. Not peace, exactly, but clarity. Because here's what no one tells you. Guilt is not always a symptom of wrongdoing. Sometimes it's the echo of old obedience dying inside you. You've been taught to seek truth, but in seeking truth, you found something even more potent: leverage. Not the loud kind, not the brute force of domination, but the subtle, elegant leverage of awareness. You know now that to influence isn't to deceive, it's to select, to focus the lens, and to choose which part of yourself speaks in each moment, knowing full well there are always others waiting behind the curtain. You've learned that morality is not a fixed compass, it's a conversation between instinct and principle, between what you want and what the world can bear. There's no universal law against shaping perception, only the question, do you know what you're doing and why? This is what Machiavelli couldn't say aloud in his time, what Nietzsche whispered through paradox, what Jung hinted at in dreams. Power is not the opposite of goodness. Power is the medium through which goodness or destruction takes form. And now you must decide, what will you use it for? There will always be moments when you feel the old guilt creep in, when silence seems safer than precision, when softening your truth feels like love. And in those moments, ask yourself, is this kindness or is this fear dressed in virtue? You've seen now that manipulation is not a singular act. It's a state of being, a way of engaging with reality, not to escape it, but to rewrite it, to step out of passivity and into authorship. And the world will resist this, not because it's wrong, but because it's unfamiliar, because it threatens the systems built on quiet compliance and inherited shame. But once you've seen the strings, you can't pretend you're not a puppeteer. And so, you move differently. You speak not just to be heard, but to direct attention. You listen not just to understand, but to map the terrain of desire. You smile not to please, but to anchor a mood. You choose your silences. You feel the room bend slightly when you enter, not because you're forcing it, but because you've learned how to hold your gravity. This is not emptiness. This is sovereignty. Fromm once said, "The task we must set for ourselves is not to feel secure, but to be able to tolerate insecurity." And nowhere is that more true than here, because owning your influence means tolerating what comes with it, the suspicion, the misunderstanding, the discomfort of being powerful in a world that asks you to be palatable. But power isn't volume, it's presence, stillness, precision, so you won't always explain. You won't always be liked, but you will be felt. And in a world addicted to noise, presence is the rarest form of influence. You've come to the end of the map, and what remains is this. Guiltless manipulation is not about abandoning morality. It's about transcending inherited scripts in order to write your own. It's about stepping off the stage of societal approval and into the deeper theater of intention. And so the question is not, who do I need to be to survive this world? The question is, what world do I need to manipulate into being so that I no longer have to survive, but can finally live? No one can answer that but you. But if you've felt the tremor in your chest as you listened, if you've caught a glimpse of the architect behind your eyes, if something in you has shifted, then the transformation has already begun. So the question remains, not who are you, but who are you becoming, now that you've stopped asking for permission?